Okay, well, welcome everybody to our September meeting of Tulsa Audubon. I'm John Kennington, president, and so we have a really short business meeting here. But I do not have a recorder's report. But any interesting birds around? Anybody? Tuesday morning birders here? Anybody? It's sort of been a slow time of year anyway. So. Okay, so no good. Nope, there's no birds around, huh? So okay, we have no birds. Guess that's the news, huh? Yeah, we're yellow warbler. Okay, that's a migrant. That's it. Yep, that's going. Okay, let's see. We've got a few things to talk about. First, Julia Harris, do you want to talk about the outreach committee?
Okay, well, he's told you we have a committee, and we're starting a program of outreach, educational outreach, and so we're focusing first on civic groups and school classes, and there are lots of possibilities, but we want to do a few things really well to start with. And so I'm going to see what interest we have in your helping us, and I'm going to pass this around, and don't treat it like a hot potato. Look at it. And there are really 4 possibilities. You could sign up that you'd be interested in being a presenter for civic groups. You're comfortable with grown-ups, say. And then the couple of other possibilities, being interested in presenting to school classes. And it really worked nicely for Oxley to have a team of people going out to school. So there's an assistant who's passing out stuff while someone is doing the talking, and so, so there's opportunity to be an assistant, or if you don't feel quite like being in charge of a presentation for kids, you could go along and help. And then if anybody has presentations that they're already doing, please tell me. So that's all I'm going to take time for. Any questions on that? Okay.
And we will have programs, that we'll have prepared programs for you to present, so you don't have to come up with something.
Right, and training.
So we just need warm bodies who are willing warm bodies. You don't have to come up with anything. So thank you, Julie, and thank you to the committee for doing that, because I get calls all the time, and normally we can't accommodate those kind of requests. So this will be really nice that if we can get a group of our folks together who agree to do this, it'll be a really good thing for Tulsa Audubon. Okay, another thing is we have a new, our calendar of events for 2018 and 19 has now been published. There's copies on the back table, so please take one or more. Take one. You can leave one in your car. Paper still works good. I mean, I know we all have these, but still nothing like a piece of paper. And this paper will last for a year. It's good through next August. So, and we have hundreds of them to give out. So please go ahead and take one for your reference. We also have just published an updated version of our bird checklist for Tulsa County. And I want to thank Jim Deming, did the bulk of the work updating the occurrences. I had sort of did the formatting on it, and Jim Arterburn, Terry Mitchell, and Bill Carroll reviewed it, as well as Sienna Leach, who last reviewer and found stuff that all the other experts missed, so thank you. So these are available. They are 25 cents a piece, because we do have, we'll have on the website, if you want to download a copy that just prints on a normal sheet of paper, you can. But if you want the nice little harder, the cardstock checklist, these are 25 cents. Since we did have to pay to get these printed. But it is current, uses the current eBird taxonomy. The information on the top is also expanded this information to match what you put in when you're entering your observations in eBird, so it'll be more conducive to for doing that. So you can use this while you're in the field, and then you come home at night, and you can then easily put that into eBird. Now I do have, just looking ahead on the schedule, October 30th, we have an after-work beginning bird walk that I've been doing at Ray Harrell. That's at 6 p.m., not a.m. So that's in the after, yeah. Okay, let's see. The next thing we have coming up, we've got quite a busy month here coming up, but October 7th, which is a Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock, we're having an open house and dedication at Flycatcher Trail at the Jenks High School, which is one of our major projects that Tulsa Audubon's been, that we do. And we're going to be presenting. Last year we had a large fundraising campaign to help raise funds for the maintenance and upkeep and improvement of Flycatcher Trail. And we have some bricks and stones with the donor's name on them, and we'll be unveiling those that day at Flycatcher Trail. Aileen, is there anything you want to add about that, or? Yep, and I'm sure we'll have some fun things to do. We're still working on planning the exact agenda and all, but it'll be a nice time of year to be at Flycatcher Trail too. That's why we sort of pushed it off to fall, because hopefully the weather will be pleasant, and there should still be some nice activity with the butterflies and all still at that point. So October 7th, Sunday, 3 o'clock. Please join us for that, so we can recognize all the folks who helped make Flycatcher Trail possible. Our next meeting is October 16th, and that's going to be Dr. Mia Revels talking about Oklahoma's saw-whet owls. This is a program we originally scheduled last year, but we got iced out or rained out or whatever we had. Now, we lost a couple of programs last year because of the weather, and so Dr. Revels will be back speaking next month. Are there any other announcements I'm forgetting to make? Was there something, Mary, that you mentioned? Oh yeah. Todd Humphrey is teaching a class on birds. It is all about birds. It's at the Jenks, it's an adult class at the Jenks, but through the Jenks, adult learning community ed. That's it. And it starts this Thursday. There's 11 spots left. I was pulling it up on the. But if you go out to the Jenks Community Ed and look for his All About Birds class, and Todd does a great job. I mean, I know everybody who's done that in the past has really enjoyed it. So if you want to, learn a little more about birds than you already know, sign up for his class. So hopefully he's got enough people in it that it's gonna, it'll happen. So if you are thinking about it, go home tonight and sign up for it, because it'll be well worth your time. And it starts this Thursday night. I think it's 6 classes and 2 field trips. So 6 weeks, and then they'll schedule 2 field trips based on what folks are able to do. Any other announcements? Okay, if not, then Cheryl, would you come up and introduce our speaker?
Our speaker tonight is Jay Pruett, who graciously agreed to talk tonight instead of next month, since we had to flip programs. He's going to talk to us about his trip doing a Cuban bird survey. Jay is the former conservation director of the Oklahoma Nature Conservancy. He's an avid birder and photographer, travels far and wide with some of our other presenters to find interesting birds, takes great photographs, and longtime Tulsa Audubon Society member and board member, and just a generally kind, nice person. So please welcome Jay.
Thank you, Cheryl. I appreciate that. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. And as some of you may know, among the things I like to do is get out in nature and see what is there locally, but also in other places. So I've enjoyed taking trips to a lot of places to find out what nature is like there. And I use birds as sort of my window into nature, but I really am interested in insects and mammals and plants and a lot of things. So I really enjoy those trips. And on some of those trips recently, I have talked to people, and we like to share stories about trips to different places. And several people had mentioned to me that, you know, they went to Cuba and went birding there. I said, really? It's just right down there. Really? Is it that much different? They said, oh, it's really nice. So I looked into it and see what would be involved, and signed up for a birding survey that was going to be done there this past January. Now, going to Cuba is not quite like going to other countries in that you can't just go there and go birding. You have, if you go from the U.S., you have to go there for a sanctioned reason by the government. And so these trips are organized as bird surveys, not birding trips for people's enjoyment. They're bird surveys sanctioned by the government. These particular ones are done by the Caribbean Conservation Trust. And this is one of the things they do, is they have birding trips that go to Cuba and do surveys around the country and present that information to the Cuban government. So it's kind of a service for that. So I looked into that, talked to them, got signed up, and took a trip in January. And one thing I like about talking with other birders is finding out about what they saw in other places. What did they like? What was the bird life like? And what was nature like? And not to mention the culture in the country. So I want to give you a snapshot tonight and share some of my experience with that. And maybe for one or two of you, that'll spark something that says, well, maybe I'll try that. But so I'm going to take a quick run through the trip. The trip lasted about a week. And I want to show you a lot of things, so I'm going to kind of rush through it all a little bit. But let me give you some of the basics. All right. The bird survey was in January, and on this particular one, there were about 14 participants, like myself, from different states around the country. All of them pretty good birders. And mentioned the Conservation Trust. We had 2 guides from the trust that went with us. They go there all the time. And so they're very familiar with the places and what's there and how to find them and so on. And we also have local guides that are up on the latest information. And we all piled into a 15-person van and drove around the country. We flew in from Fort Lauderdale, landed in Havana, and we were off. So this is the team that went on the trip. Quite a mixture of folks. In fact, one of the other participants was a recently retired conservation director for the Nature Conservancy in Kentucky. So we had a lot of things to talk about. But they were interesting people. Usually groups 14 or 15 or 20, there can be some little friction between some of the folks sometimes. Personalities don't match. But in this one instance, it all worked great. So everybody got along terrific, and everybody enjoyed everybody else's company. So let me give you kind of a quick look at where we were. We landed in Havana. We birded some around Havana for the first day. The second day, we went out to the west into some of the limestone mountains out there and working lands. We came back, and then we went further to the east and came down here to the coast, right along the Bay of Pigs. Anybody heard of that? We heard from the Cubans that that's where the United States got beat. So it made them feel good to tell us that. And then we went along the main road through the country and stopped at some different working places there. And then we went up north to this archipelago of islands up here. It's being developed a little bit for tourism, but it has mangrove forest there and sets of birds that you can't see elsewhere. And from there, we went down here to Camagüey, and we stayed there a couple of nights. And one day, we went to a horse ranch down here in this part of the state to see some other birds. And very nice place to stay and very enjoyable. And then we left from there to go back. Okay, some of the places we visited, I don't want to spend much time on this because I barely remember the names, and I know you won't. It's not important what the names are, but these are just some of the types of places that we went to. National parks, biosphere reserves, a cave, several working ranches that have good conservation values being practiced there. We went up to the Keys on the north side of the island, and so it was kind of a varied set of habitats, and we were trying to find the most different kinds of habitats so we could find the most different kinds of birds. So we started off in Revolution Square in Havana, got a tour of the city there, very interesting, beautiful city, old Spanish architecture, colonial architecture, and really a very nice city to be in. It wasn't jam-packed with traffic. In fact, most of the cars were the old 1950s cars that you've heard about in Cuba that are sort of a cultural thing there, and it really was interesting to see them. And part of what we did when we were there is we went to visit Orlando Garrido, who actually wrote the field guide to the birds of Cuba that we were using on the trip. And he's a fascinating guy, interesting guy. Before he was a bird person, he was an international tennis star. And he had some of his trophies from Wimbledon and other places all on his wall, along with stuffed birds and all kinds of other things. So he was really a fascinating guy. He is the person who really got protection for the birds that are in Cuba that are endangered, or there's very few of them, or they're endemics. So he's kind of the father of conservation ornithology for Cuba. Fascinating guy. So we went out first day just to some lakes and water bodies around Havana. It was raining. Man, it rains a lot in Cuba. But we would stand in the rain under the trees and look around, and here's a snail kite that had just harvested a snail to take back to the nest, either for himself or little ones. And there were ducks and waders around too, and always palm warblers seem to be anywhere where there's water as well. Saw a lot of those. So the second day we went up into the mountains a little bit, and the forest there, this was all clear cut 50 years ago for agricultural land. There were no trees at all. But through an initiative of the landowners and the people that live there, they have replanted it, and look at it now. It can be done. And so there were some fascinating birds here and other places around. Still raining though. Here's the giant chimney. We came to a clearing in the woods and popped out there and, whoa, what is that? Oh, it's a chimney. But interesting. There was also a bird here is the western spindalis. It used to be called the stripe-headed tanager, which makes a little more sense to me. Gorgeous bird, but he's pretty interested in staying under cover. The first endemic bird that we saw there, and there are 26 endemic birds that live only in Cuba, and that's really what everybody wanted to see. We haven't seen them anywhere else, of course. And so when we saw the first one, the Cuban bullfinch, it was a less than ideal setting. It was raining and he was flitting around, and picture's not very good, but you kind of get an idea of what they're like, kind of a really dark gray, not very remarkable coloration at all. So check one off the list. The next one's a little better as far as looks. It's the Cuban green woodpecker, and we actually saw a family of them here. You can see the male over here, female down below, and here's Junior trying to figure out what's going on. So they were interesting to see, and really a gorgeous bird. If you get a good look at it, just kind of flaming colors and just really attractive. So when you see a big E up next to it, that means one of the endemic birds from Cuba. We also saw around pretty commonly the red-legged thrush, and they behave a lot like our robins. They actually fill that ecological niche there. There really aren't many robins around, but the red-legged thrush is probably even a step up on the robin in beauty, so really enjoyed seeing him. Here's somebody that we all recognized. I remember once going to Mexico and hearing about all the birds we were going to see, and the first thing I saw was an eastern meadowlark. Same thing here in Canada. But this eastern meadowlark is actually one that has been isolated by being in Cuba for long enough that its genetics have changed enough to where it's going to qualify as a separate species. It's a subspecies now, but all the paperwork and all is being gone through to make this a new species found only in Cuba. Here's another woodpecker. Wow. Fernandina's flicker. I never even heard of that. But he is a real stunner. This is the only one we saw in this one place. He was vocal. He wasn't too afraid of us, but he is one beautiful woodpecker. Check another one on the list. And then as we're driving down the road in our van, we're driving through these countrysides, kind of hilly, and there's little marshy ponds along the road where I guess they've barred dirt to make the roads and all. And we went by a number of them, and we're going by this one, and about 6 of us all jumped up at the same time and said, "Stop! Lifer!" And everybody's looking around, what? And looking here in this pond, you see 2 masked ducks, females. Really hard to see in there, and here's the third one right here. I can't tell you how many times I've gone places looking for those suckers. I missed the one that was in Oklahoma last November, and here we are driving down the road, and we just stumbled across it. We hadn't planned to stop here, but people jumped out, they'd taken pictures, they got the scopes on it, and just to see the masked duck, which is so hard to see sometimes, and we could have easily gone by and not seen it too. So very lucky, and we were all happy campers on that first day. One of the places we went to visit is called Hacienda Cortina, and this formerly was an estate of a big landowner previously, very wealthy, and so he had nice gardens and nice grounds around. This is the entrance to the property. It's about all that's left now of the infrastructure there. The landowner had the land taken away back during some of the revolutionary times, and the land was given to local people, and it's now mostly a ranch and a hog farm. But it still has the ecological qualities that are conducive to having birds around. So we stopped here as part of what we were doing. The area is full of limestone mountains, caves and gullies and ravines and such. So really gorgeous, lots of habitat, different little microhabitats. And so that western part of the state is full of that. The soils are really productive. They grow things like sugarcane and tobacco there. And here you see a little blue heron flying over the tobacco fields. I don't know why he's doing that. They're usually around the water somewhere, but he was doing it. And then we go by some homes sometimes, country homes, and you see different animals in the yard. And we were walking by this group, and these helmeted guinea fowl were all kind of standing there chattering to each other. And I could just imagine what they're saying. How are we going to get around that darn dog? The corn's down there on the other end. How are we going to do this? But they are not native. They are released from domesticated animals. But they're still interesting to see anyway. So we then got to the Cueva de Portales, which is a limestone cave. It's not just a down-in-the-hole cave with a dead end, but it's got different openings at different places. And at one time, this was the hideout for Che Guevara back during the Cuban Missile Crisis. This was his headquarters. And he and his army of 400 people or whatever it was stayed in this cave around this area. And it's an interesting place, beautiful. But they had carved out meeting rooms, barracks, Che's own room where he had his cot where he slept in his office. So that was interesting to see that as well. It was also nice to see that they had not destroyed really the essentials of the cave too while they were there. Gorgeous limestone caves. And we came out of the cave on the other side, And there it is, the bird that's on everybody's list, the Cuban trogon. We got a glimpse of it through the trees. This is the national bird for Cuba. And it's the only trogon in the country. And we got around to see the front side. Wow, what a stunner. Check out that spatulate tail around there, the red and the white. What a handsome bird. Really on the top of everybody's list for a must-see for going to Cuba. A less than spectacular bird is the Cuban solitaire. And I was still trying to take pictures of the trogon, and somebody said, "Jay, right in front of you." And I looked around, and there about 2 feet from my forehead was the solitaire. It was almost too close to focus my camera. I got off a couple of shots, but you can't tell much about it. But check. There's another little look at it. Very plain, kind of a grayish color, a little darker gray on the back. And then we came across this bruiser. This is the great lizard cuckoo. I was fascinated by him. He kind of reminds me of a cross between a cuckoo with that spotted tail and a roadrunner, the way he acts. He runs around like he's the boss. He's going to take care of everything. Really like this guy. And you could see him once in a while in the brush, peeking out through some leaves or running across a branch. Really a gorgeous bird. Just about everywhere in the country and in the city too, cave swallows flying around. They even nested in one of the hotels that we stayed at in another place. They would fly right into the lobby and go right up to their nest, and the people welcome them.
They have bats in the caves?
I did not see any bats in the caves. I would suspect that there would be, but another one of the endemics that we're looking for is the giant kingbird. He's a big bruiser. Look at that head and beak. He could probably tear up a snake with that thing. Really a big kingbird. Colors are not very remarkable otherwise, but boy, to see him up close, that was something. Another nice endemic. So the lands here still out in the limestone mountains, working lands, either farms or ranches, and we were able to see a lot of different things while we were out there. Very nice place to go. Coming back in towards the city, we went under a power line, and there's an American kestrel, red phase. I've never seen that. It's really gorgeous. It's endemic to Cuba. That's why I've never seen it before. But they have both red and white phases in Cuba, and otherwise they're just like our American kestrels here. As we got further away from the limestone country, we went through a few patches of pine trees. There's not a lot, but there were some, and there are some birds that really hang out there amongst the pines, and the olive-capped warbler is one of those. He, again, is very secretive. He doesn't like you to get too close. That was taken from the road, so it's not a great shot, but you can at least see what it is. And the vegetation there grows all kinds of fruit, of course, being in the tropics. The jackfruit here, these are not even close to full grown yet, but they're already pretty big. And I think those are edible as well. But looking up in the trees, we saw the red-legged honeycreeper. And he's a tropical bird that's all around Central and South America. But if you look closer, you can see the misses here too. And here's Junior up here as well. One of two babies that were there. And they were flitting around up in the tree and looking for something to eat. But a handsome bird, but he didn't stick around very long. There's that national bird again. Every time I saw it, I had to take a picture. I don't care if I had 50 already, I had to take another one. Just so gorgeous, so stately standing there, and that sculpted tail is just unreal. Other woodpeckers around, yellow-bellied sapsuckers are fairly common. This is a juvenile. They just happened to be on a tree along the trail that we were walking along. Another bird that everybody wanted to see are the owls. The Stygian owl. I've heard about that for a long time. And the guides knew of a patch of pine trees where the male and female roosted at night. So we went and looked through those pine trees and couldn't find them. He said, "Oh no, they're in there." So we looked up, kept looking, and lo and behold, there they were. What a handsome bird. He didn't seem too bothered. We were interrupting his sleep a little bit, but really a majestic owl. And again, it was cloudy and misty, so not good light for a picture, but I'm glad to get one of it anyway.
That'd be about the size of our horned owl, really.
Yeah, maybe even a little bigger. He's a big boy. I mentioned that some of the farms in the area are working farms. This particular one is a hog farm. So it had troughs and pens and hog barns and all that sort of thing. But the birds were around in the trees. They were down getting in the pig slop. They were hanging out around the barn. Didn't seem to mind that, hey, we can get along here. One of the birds we saw in the trees was the Cuban blackbird, another endemic. Looks somewhat similar to some of ours, but it's a little stockier and his coat is really sleek. Almost looks like Teflon. And we saw them around the country, different places. Again, as we're going further east from Havana, we were going through forested land. Some of this is obviously not primary forest, it's been regrown. But you can see the different kinds of species of trees out there and the diversity. The white blooms are the cecropia trees, which are very attractive to birds. And so it's really good to see habitat out there. Maybe it's not primo habitat, but it's still really good habitat. And there's our friend, the red phase of the kestrel. This one had just grabbed him some lunch off of the tree, and he's finishing off that lizard. Also in the grassland areas, the grass quits, there are two kinds in Cuba. This is the endemic Cuban grass quit, kind of a dapper, stately looking guy. And I'll show you a picture in a minute of the other one. Some more of the hills, and here you can see the famous gringo tree. It's got that red peeling bark, which is supposed to be like gringos who come down, lay out in the sun, and get burned and then peel. Here's the yellow-faced grass quit. It's a little more widespread than just in Cuba, but you can tell the difference. These are seed eaters, of course. And here's a friend that we know, the yellow rump warbler. He was down there, and we would see one or two of these around places where there was water, pools of water, small streams. And the old cars were just around everywhere. Parks, towns, houses. Really was fascinating. I could see somebody going in there and just doing a photography trip just on that. This bird is called a Zenaida dove, and it's fairly common, but it's still kind of striking, and it's got that kind of a purple sheen right there on his nape of his neck, and that's one way to recognize him. But he had other friends around too, other doves. Here is the gray-fronted, or it used to be called gray-headed quail dove, kind of brilliantly colored rainbow on his back. Handsome guy. They just walking around eating the seeds. They were almost walk between our legs. Pretty tame. So we went further on down and we started getting into more towards wetland areas. And we saw this guy fly out of a tree. It was daytime, but they're diurnal. So a lucky break for us. We got to see him. We got to go where he was. And he was pretty accommodating. Handsome little devil. I'm sure he gives fits to the little birds and animals, but he was pretty accommodating. I see you. Don't try anything. Love owls. I went to Rice University and our mascot was the owl, so I'm partial to owls. This is the West Indian woodpecker. Looks sort of like our flickers, but a little bit bigger and really more striking colors on his head. They were fairly common around. Speaking of striking, this one is not It's the Cuban vireo, and he's pretty plain. Kind of yellowish underneath and grayish on top, and a little hint of an eye ring there. But that's what he does. That's how he makes his living. Pretty plain. We also couldn't help but notice the culture around as we were driving around, and not many vehicles in the country. Most transportation and hauling of things was done by ox or horse carts, and this is sort of like their pickup truck. There's those kestrels again. There's the white one, and here's the red one down here. So they get along just fine. Another owl, the bare-legged owl, another endemic. Pretty hard to see. The only reason we get to see it is because the local guide knew the tree where this guy roosts in the daytime. So he would go up and give it a little rap on the bottom of the tree, and he would crawl out and look around for about 3 minutes. We got to see him, took our pictures, back down the hole he went, back to sleep. So another species that is an endemic there are the Cuban parakeets. You would think it's a tropical country, there'd be lots of parakeets and parrots and all that like you picture in South America. Not so. There's only a very few here, and they have specialized since they've been isolated for so long. And these are really affectionate towards each other. They're very gregarious. They all hang around together in pairs. And they're chirping and horsing around and grooming each other, and that'll tire a person out, you know. So they sleep during the day too some. This is another kingbird, not quite as big as the giant, but it's the loggerhead kingbird. It's not endemic to Cuba. I've seen one time in southeast Arizona, but still a handsome bird. Kind of reminds us of our eastern kingbird here, but he's bigger. And here's probably the second biggest bird that is on anybody's list to go see, the bee hummingbird, the smallest bird on the planet. And it's only found in Cuba. Hummingbirds are small to start with, but this guy is small even for a hummingbird, of course. This is a female, it's the first one we saw, and she would sit for a few minutes, then she'd have to get up and go eat again. So she wasn't still for very long. She was always moving around. And then a little bit later, we got to see another of the quail doves. This one is the blue-headed quail dove. I've seen pictures of those for a long time and wanted to see one, so I'm glad we got to see that here. And right along the same trail there where we saw that, the saw-scaled curly-tails, aptly named, were scurrying around looking for bugs and trying to warm up. There at the little spring that was bubbling up by the trail, northern parula, probably getting all beefed up to head north for the spring mating season. Also there along the stream, the greater Antillean grackle. Looks kind of like ours too, doesn't he? And there's that quail dove. And some of those guys would puff up so big, I thought they were going to explode. And it wasn't that cold, but they must be sensitive to it because there were a number of them doing that. Or maybe they're trying to look too big to swallow, I don't know. Some other warblers that we saw, the prairie warbler we saw here and there. The black and white was there. They're one of the first migrants to come through our area in the springtime. Here's the Lusagras flycatcher, and it is outside of Cuba also, but it's got such an interesting name. It's really similar to some of our flycatchers as well. And it was on a trail, so I guess we could have named that flycatcher trail as well. But I was glad to see one. I had never seen one before. And another flycatcher, the Cuban peewee. You can tell with the crest and the colors underneath and the bill and just kind of his posture. He looks like a peewee and got that half eye ring going on, but he is only in Cuba. Here's another brute of a bird, the greater Antillean nightjar. He kind of reminds me of a Chuck Will's widow. Can you see him there? His whiskers up there in his head. His body's down here, and this is his tail coming down here. He's really camouflaged in there. He thinks we can't see him. We can't see him very well. He's not going anywhere. He'll come out at night and look for bugs. And this is a palm wetland. We're getting into a little wetter part of the country and towards the center part of the country. And different types of forest habitats. Some of them are wet, and those are wetlands in effect. And different species like to live in different types of habitats. Unfortunately, this one likes it there too. Feral hogs, we have those here. And I don't think they're as big a problem, maybe because they're hunted more, but obviously with having hog farms around, there's going to be some get away sometimes. Now we're starting to get down on the coast and see some of the real marshy areas. Freshwater marshes, brackish marshes, saltwater marshes, big cattail marsh here. There are some tall grass marshes as well. So different birds in different places. And here in these cattails and along the streams is the Zapata sparrow. And only in Cuba, there are on this peninsula here a number of different birds named Zapata and appropriately. And he's kind of a handsome guy, not too afraid. Speaking of handsome, Mr. Turkey Vulture here is just kind of showing off his brute. And oddly enough, this was the most common bird we saw in the whole country. Every day, every habitat, any time of day, there were turkey vultures around. I don't know what they're eating, but they are doing very well there. Mangrove wetlands also. Again, different species of birds live there. This guy lives there. It's the Zapata wren. You can see him right here singing. He was singing, we were playing a call, he was singing back, and there was nothing we could do that was going to get him to come from behind those leaves. And he stayed there for 20 minutes doing that. And we finally had to say, that's the best we're going to get for a picture. And he won, but it was good to see him anyway. There's another turkey vulture. This one was having some breakfast on the trail when we went by him and didn't bother him at all. Looking at some of the other endemics too, the Cuban oriole, it's a subspecies of the black-cowled oriole, and it, like some of the others, is going through the process now of being evaluated to see if they're separate species, and probably will be. Similar to our red-winged blackbird is the tawny-shouldered blackbird. That's really a gorgeous color of orange there. And there's also a red-shouldered blackbird. I did get a picture of it, but I could only see the red spot on his wing, and that's it, so I didn't bring it. But handsome bird. Yellow warblers? Yep, we'll see you in the springtime, fella. This great egret, somebody twisted his neck for something. He's looking for a chiropractor. Never seen that on a bird flying, but he must have his eye on something. But they're in all the marshes, very common. Reddish egrets, they like the brackish water ones. They're just as gorgeous down there as they are on our coast. Double-crested cormorants, not a lot of them, but some. And here's a green heron that didn't mind me just being still there close to him, and he was just going about his business of finding dinner. He let me get really close, and so I did. And then here's a different, the flamingo, odd-shaped critters. Alice in Wonderland croquet mallets, if you remember. But very handsome birds and very efficient at doing what they do to eat. Also in the marshes, the ospreys. And we happen to be on a little tower at this particular time, and here comes one flying at us. And He could care less. He's looking for something to eat. And he just kept flying and kept coming by, and I kept shooting the camera. Very handsome bird. Royal terns were pretty common in the wetlands as well, along with some others, sandwich terns. And here's the latest doo-wop group from the 50s, the Four Flamingos. I couldn't have planned it better. It was there, and I shot, and there it is. So flamingos were around. They live around the island. 2 years ago, there were about 40,000 flamingos living around the island. But after Hurricane Irma went through, there are now only 20,000. Only 20,000 left. So really did a number on them. Sad. Also there in the marshes, similar to our common black hawk, is the Cuban common black hawk. Again, a separate species. And we only saw them perching except for one time when saw one flying over. So this gives you a sense of what the habitat is like. Shallow bays, vegetation growing out, cloudy, rainy, misty, of course. Snowy egret. I still don't know why they have yellow feet. They're called snowy, but. And we did see one Cuban crocodile. And I said, wait a minute. They're not crocodiles in this part of the world. They're alligators. We have alligators, not crocodiles. And they said, yeah, this is the Cuban crocodile, though. That's what we want to call it. That's what we're going to call it. It's a subspecies of the American alligator, but again, genetically different species. This guy must be saying, did I forget my deodorant today? Where is everybody? One pelican down here in the bay. The big storm coming. Everybody else knows to go to shelter, but he's going to try to catch one last fish, I guess. And when the birds in the marsh take flight, it can be quite a spectacular sight. Here's some flamingos and blue-winged teals, and there's probably a shoveler in there too. They'll circle around and come back down and land. But the moisture and the weather patterns here and all really make storms build up in a hurry each day. And it's really kind of gorgeous to see the clouds. Common shorebird, the willets. We have them on our Texas coast a lot. They're kind of plain looking until they spread their wings out and fly. And then, wow. And we had heard a report of a leucistic willet that was somewhere right around this area. We walked around a corner, there's a bunch of willets on some rocks. Oops, wrong button. And this guy just went, here I am, take my picture, and then put his wings back down. So we obliged. Great blue herons. They're not overly abundant, but they're around, of course. Short-billed dowitchers. Even a blue crab in the water made me hungry. And there's that Cuban black hawk flying over. They look a little different when they got their wings out, and pretty handsome. I'm sorry, another car. I just couldn't help myself. It's like the Cuban Trogon. I see one, I got to take a picture, but I didn't bring the other 100. Here's the white form of the American kestrel up a little closer. And here's a smooth-billed Annie. This one was in a town, in a village, but they like to be around wetlands and all too. Very sociable birds amongst themselves. And we got to go to a house where a guy has this tree in the backyard. I forget what it's called, but the hummingbirds love it. And he had bee hummingbirds in his backyard. And he takes good care of his tree, and he puts out water, and he even brings out feeders on his own, because he loves having them there, and it's a revenue source for him. So that's great. So there's the male bee hummingbird making a beeline for that flower that the landowner there is holding. Just an adorable little bird. See his gorget here, kind of shining. And here's a switcheroo. we saw a cage, there was a bird in it, and it was a painted bunting. What? Where's the parakeets and all? But to each their own. Here's Mr. B again. And here's his only hummingbird competition in Cuba, the Cuban emerald. Strikingly handsome, obviously bigger than the bee hummingbird. But the bee hummingbird does not take any guff off this guy, and he'll chase him off of his flower if it gets too close. Quite a striking dude, though. And the bees, being small, but they also kind of blend into all the leaves and shadows, so they're not easy to see unless they're up and moving. That's not the case with the Cuban parrot. You can hear them, you can see them, they're boisterous. It's the only parrot on the island. We only saw them in this one place. I hope that's not indicative of their distribution, but here you can see 3 of them. They're all pretty handsome. Another endemic, the palm crow, is not limited to Cuba, but the Cuban palm crow is. And he likes to hang out with some of the other crows, and they like the ranch lands where it's kind of open understory. There's the Cuban parakeet again, out from under the trees and out in the sunlight. And here's an American redstart, again, probably getting all fed up so he can move to North America for nesting season. And this is a house sparrow. I wouldn't normally take a picture of a house sparrow, but it was just right there, so I had to. And it didn't turn out too bad for a house sparrow. Looks like he's just learning how to fly. Hurricanes don't only cause havoc on flamingos. We saw 2 wind turbines as we were driving down the road, and this one was in the hurricane. And normally wind turbines have a brake on them. When it gets to going too fast, it breaks them because they don't want it to go real fast. The brakes failed on this one. That blade got to going 100 miles an hour, so hot and fast it burned the whole generator unit up. And those storms can come up quickly, and they can get pretty hairy.
When was their major last hurricane?
I think that was last fall, Hurricane Irma. I'll show you some of the damage from that here in just a minute. Right here, right on target. Thank you. Owe you $10. The hurricane damage on the north side of the island, especially in the mangroves and in the short tree forests there, was extensive. Wind damage, of course, you can see here, but there are birds that normally live here, and but they were not seen too much after the hurricane. There were just a few, but we went to some places where those birds are normally abundant. None. There's no base of the food chain there. This is probably my favorite little guy. I like the bee hummingbirds, but this little Cuban toady, he's only about yay big, but he thinks he is the bee's knees. He is. Look at those colors, that beautiful blue and pink and red and green and white. Gee. He was very confiding, and I couldn't help but keep clicking.
You got chickadee eyes.
Maybe just a tad bigger than that.
How much did he charge you to take that photo?
I left before he could try to catch up with me. Here's another bird, another one of our birds that we see coming through in migration. And this one was just hanging around a water feature. Only one we saw. We saw a number of yellow-throated warblers. And then out in the marshes, flocks of birds. You've seen the blue-winged teal and flamingos, but the black-necked stilts also fly around in big flocks. And they get a few willets trying to hide in there too sometimes. Okay, this is a taxi. One more car. Tricolored heron. Another handsome bird from the coast. And there's a sora. It was in some of the marshes. Just got off one shot before it ducked into the weeds, and if it hadn't been for the reflection, I wouldn't have even kept that. But here we go. Oriente warbler again. Another endemic. Nice butterscotchy yellow there. Roseate spoonbills on the coast. We see those on the Texas coast. And they are in Oklahoma sometimes. But they can be quite graceful, and especially when they got that sharp pink color. They get that color from the shrimp they eat, and they can be quite graceful. These two look like they were just in unison. Aerial acrobatics. Here's some more hurricane damage. This is some of the mangroves. Not necessarily just the wind, but the tidal surge of all the salt water coming in there and getting not only on their roots, but on their limbs and everything else. They just can't tolerate that, and it's dead. It'll be 40 years before that little forest is back again. But that's part of the way it is with nature. Beautiful beaches there, not a soul on them as far as you can see. So the birds have it to feast on the little critters inside the sargassum weed there. Sanderlings and ruddy turnstones. I don't know if you can see all the turnstones, but they camouflage really well in there. And there's another bird that's similar to our fulvous whistling duck. This is the West Indian whistling duck. And this is the only place we saw them. There were 3 of them here on this limb. Still a handsome bird. Jacanas. That's not a jacana. Caracara. That's a northern caracara. And this is the only one we saw on the trip. He was in a parking lot, kind of showing off. I don't know really what he was trying to do, but trying to get away from that name jacana, probably. There's more hurricane damage. Luckily, it was only limited to the north side of the island, on the east part of the island. But still, some of the cays up there, all their vegetation was just gone. But here's an area that survived, and the palms seem to be doing pretty good. Gold-billed terns. There's that common blackhawk with his color all folded up in his wings. The guides really talked a long time before they said, yep, it's a solitary sandpiper. They don't see them very often, and we're surprised to see this one here, but we all agreed that's what it is. We did see a pair of limpkins too, reminded me of Florida. They like marshlands, eat snails and invertebrates and small vertebrates. One of my favorite warblers is the Cape May. That was the last warbler species I saw from my list. And so they hold a special place in my heart. And there were probably a dozen of them in this one tree. And this is the northern jacana. My apologies for using your name elsewhere, fellow. But this is actually 2 of them, a male and a female, and they're going through their mating ritual. And we actually came up on this little marshy area, and one was at one end of it, and one was at the other. They called, and they ran to the middle, and then they went through this kind of dance, pecking thing, and it was done, and they left. That was it. Married and divorced in 10 minutes. But it was interesting to see them go through that mating ritual. I tried to tell somebody else, this is the part where the female eats the male after they mate, but no, that's spiders. And there they are together. Yes, that's right. And as we're coming back to Camagay, we had this traffic jam. Very appropriate. Here's the donkey-drawn cart, followed by a big old industrial truck and 2 old cars. This is one of the buildings here in Camagüey. We actually got to ride some of the little bicycle taxis and take a tour around town and then go to dinner that last night there. And really is a gorgeous city, and food was wonderful. People were really nice, hotels, just people on the street, everybody. So we had to leave the next day. I think we were all sad to have to do that. But the results of the trip, out of 368 birds known on the island, we saw 163 of them. And for January, they said that's a pretty high number. Usually it's around 150. Endemic species, we saw 25 of the 26 endemic species. Wow, I would never have dreamed it had been that high percentage. The one we didn't see, the Zapata rail, lives in a swamp that's in an inaccessible area. There's no roads to it even. I don't know how it got discovered, but nobody ever goes there anymore. Nobody ever sees them. It's never on the list. But so you're always going to be one short, but it was really fun to get 25 of the 26.
Reason to go back.
Yeah, have to be some other situation where I can get in there to see that rascal. But of the endemic species, I got decent photographs of 23 of the 25, so I'm happy with that too. I really like to capture them in a picture and bring them home, and that way I don't feel like I'm leaving them forever. We actually drove a lot of miles, 1,200 miles on the island, but we went to a lot of places to see a lot of different habitats, to see a lot of different birds. Bad experiences? None. It's very rare on a trip that you go and you don't have something, bad food somewhere or some kind of problem with local people or whatever, but hotels not having reservations, but there was no problem on this trip at all. Little did we know that our guides, after each trip in the evening, they would go up and they would get together and say, okay, how many of these birds do we see at this marsh? How many species? Okay, and how many of each one? And they kept those records every day. And when the trip was over, they went back home, and Michael filled out an eBird entry for every place we stopped and put in the numbers of birds and the species of birds. So that data is all in there in the record. And that also constitutes the information that he then submits to the Cuban government to say, we did another survey for you, here's the results. So they get good long-term data to see, if they care, what's going on. And there really is more of a scientific inquiry going on amongst the culture in the island now too. So I think that information will be used. Education is very highly valued there, and the folks are really well educated. So I think there will be people sort of take up that conservation bent to want to do even more than what they're already doing to help conserve some of the species like these endemics that really are key to part of their ecotourism and a key part of their heritage as well. So I would recommend a trip to Cuba. It's not too far, it doesn't cost too much. It's only for a week or so. You're going with people that do it all the time and they know where to go and what to see. So it was a great trip just for something to kind of fill in, and I am really glad I did it. Okay, thank you.
Was that a joke about the window?
No, that's really why it's called that.